life. Underlying dirty assets generating greenhouse gases. Gotta sell them right away. The buck stops here. Now I'm gonna put my money in wind and solar. Where it's sunny, that's the place to put my money. The buck stops here. I'll take my cue from Rockefeller. Divest to make the weather better. Show some love to all I treasure. I've decided to divest from companies that I detest. It's a way I can protest. The buck stops here. The buck stops here. The buck stops here.
Yasher koach. Thank you, Mirala. And welcome, everyone. Fred, Rabbi Edat Shalom, delighted to welcome many of you in real time and hopefully more who will access this in the days and weeks ahead. A very short frame for why a seemingly secular presentation about how we handle our household finances belongs as part of a synagogue agenda, as well as part of an interfaith agenda with our incredible partners, IPL, Interfaith Power and Light. I can welcome you on that behalf because I'm on the national board of that, and Green Faith and Interfaith Partners for the Chesapeake. We are so thrilled. So how is this specifically Jewish, such that Edat Shalom is doing it, and broadly interfaith? I want to suggest 3 short initial frames, and you will hear the ethics rolling in mixed with the logistics as our incredible panelists unfold just how bad the unquestioned status quo is and just how easy it is to make a difference. Wow. First, Deuteronomy chapter 16, verse 20, the famous Tzedek, Tzedek Tirdof, justice, justice you shall pursue. Why is it doubled? So many answers in our tradition. The obvious is simply to underline it. And that's true, but we always dig deeper. And one of the more famous commentaries, going all the way back to Rashi in the 11th century in France, says it is both the ends and the means, that we need to do justice justly. There's a theory of wealth acquisition that says earn a lot by playing fast and loose and then donate generously. And that's better than earning a lot by playing fast and loose and hoarding it, but it's not nearly as good as thinking at every step about the impact of those financial resources. Judaism does not condone simply saying, for 30 years, I'm going to build up a portfolio and then I will donate. That is not the way. For us, tzedakah is immediate. It is a moral imperative. And that, of course, goes across the biblical tradition and much more broadly, the Quranic tradition and so many others. In terms of underlining, this is the second point, there's another way that our tradition underlines sometimes, because the Hebrew text doesn't even have vowels or punctuation, much less italics or large font. So what is it that is the equivalent of large font in the Torah text? And one of the answers is occasionally, out of all the laws, once in a while they'll drop in Ani Adonai, I am God, which is like the ultimate exclamation point, right? Aces are high, you throw one down, you sweep the hand. One of the handful of places where that is described is in uprightness with your business ethics. The ethics of business are a deep concern of Torah. Honest weights and measures in the marketplace, not moving your landmark to determine what rightfully is yours and what rightfully is your neighbor's. All of this gets the Ani Adonai. So too does the very rare, you will live a good long life, I am God, and that is for biodiversity. for respecting not only all of human life, but all of life. The passage in Deuteronomy 22 about shooing away the mother bird, which is interpreted by Ramban, the Spanish 13th century exegete, who says that we are supposed to look out, as God does, for the continuance of each species. We are not in it just for ourselves and our portfolio. We're not even in it just for our community or our people or our species. We are in it together at the highest level. I am God, underlined. And finally, the simple reminder that all of this points to a matrix of ethics beyond us, to the great unsolved challenge of our time, the climate crisis. And there are so many reasons why we need to take this seriously. And as we will learn today, it is both doable to move the needle and do it relatively easily, in part by looking at our finances, because we do it for social justice, for the least among us, as the Christian tradition frames it, the epistemological privilege of the oppressed and the poor, that we need to look out for them first. The preferential option for the poor, as Catholic tradition teaches it, and tzedek tzedek tirdof in our tradition. It is primarily the global South. It is primarily communities of color. It is primarily those who have done the least to contribute to the carbon and methane buildup who are being first and worst hit by it. That's the first. The second, of course, is the integrity of all of creation, the Seder Bereshit. God said Tov, it's good. And the interconnected whole in Genesis 1:31, Tov Ma'od, it's very good. Who are we to mess with it? And finally, even if none of that works, even if you're talking to someone utterly recalcitrant who doesn't buy the urgency, Ledor Vador, from generation to generation, do we really want to gamble with our great-grandchildren's future? Our traditions are replete with texts about the moral imperative of looking out and thinking intergenerationally, not quarterly, like prophet reports, not even biennially, like elections, but truly to the third, fourth, and 1000th generation. Ledor Vador, we are in it together. All of us, disproportionately able to move the needle with our investments. All of humanity, all of creation, and even across time. And if we're in it together, then we're going to take seriously what Fran and Andy and Sarah have to share with us tonight. Thank you all.
Okay, thank you, Rabbi Fred, for your words and your leadership on climate action. When I've been at a climate demonstration in the DC area, when there were few enough people for me to recognize others, Rabbi Fred was always there. First of all, welcome to all of our participants. My name is Ken Cantor. I've been with the Dot Shalom Climate Group for several years. Many of our members have worked hard to bring these presentations to you. In particular, I'd like to thank Jim Blasek, who has lined up our speakers, Stu Simon, leader of our climate group, Merrill Goldsmith, whose music you heard a little bit earlier, Dan Metley, and Sheila Blum. We are in the middle of a moral and ethical crisis. No, not COVID-19. No, not the upcoming runoff elections in Georgia. No, not even the transfer of power of the presidency. I'm talking about massive worldwide climate change, a climate emergency. At present, the worldwide average surface temperature is about 1 degree above pre-industrial levels, and already we are seeing major consequences. Massive forest fires in the West, increasing intensity in tropical storms, the latest being Eta and Iota, that have caused major destruction in Nicaragua and other places in Central America, and many, many more disruptions. The major cause of these disasters, emissions of carbon dioxide from fossil fuel combustion. A decrease in CO2 combustion emissions is mandatory to bring climate change under control. So there are the fires, and this is from Nicaragua, this photograph you see in front of you. Okay, let's drop them for a few minutes. Until a few years ago, most scientists were warning us that the greatest danger from warming would come when average worldwide temperature reached about 2 degrees centigrade. However, dire consequences are already coming more rapidly than expected. And in 2018, the International Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, released a report showing that limiting the temperature increase to 1.5 degrees C is essential to avoid disaster. I'll paraphrase their conclusions. The needed transitions are unprecedented in terms of scale and imply deep emissions reductions in all sectors and a significant shifting of investments to sustainable activities. So, how to get to the needed transformation? Clearly, major policy initiatives on a national and international level are required. Young people get it. Greta Thunberg, the Extinction Rebellion, the Sunshine Movement. There is a way that each of us can contribute. For each of the last 4 years, a consortium of environmental groups, headed by the Rainforest Action Network, has released a report, Banking on Climate Change, detailing the extent that large banks are financing the fossil fuel industry. I recommend looking at their report, which is available online, and the URL should be in the chat if it's not now, soon. And I think that one of our panelists may have been involved with that report. He can confirm that, perhaps. The data show that 4 U.S. banks, J.P. Morgan Chase, Wells Fargo, Citi, and the Bank of America, head the list for the largest amount of financing for the fossil fuel industry, with J.P. Morgan Chase leading the others by 36%. All in all, the largest 35 global banks financed the fossil fuel industry with $2.5 trillion since the Paris Agreement in 2015. Today we will hear from 3 leaders in the movement to green our finances: Fran Teplitz of Green America, Andy Behar of As You Sow, and Sarah Shore of Green Faith. Each is deeply involved in encouraging us to make our investments and other financial decisions more closely tied to our values. We will hold the question and answer session after all the presentations. Please enter your questions in the chat. And our legal advisors have told us to issue a disclaimer that this is an educational and informational program only, and we do not provide investment, financial planning, legal, or tax advice. And you can go over the rest of this verbiage at your leisure. So for additional information, we will present this at the end. So our first speaker, Fran Teplitz, is Executive Co-Director of Green America for Business, Investing, and Policy. She is Director of the Green Business Network and Senior Fellow at Responsible Investing. Fran will discuss how to put your money to work for the greater good and why you should switch to a better bank. Fran?
Great. Thank you so much. It's wonderful to be here. Big Toda Rabah. Thank you very much to Adat Shalom. It's great to be back. We last connected for Earth Day, so it's been a little while, and I appreciate your having me once again. Thanks also to our endorsing organizations, My Chavara Kehila Chadashah, and its Green Committee, which I'm on, and I was very active with the Montgomery County Faith Alliance for Climate Solutions. I'm also a member of Interfaith Power and Light and Interfaith Partners for the Chesapeake, so it's great to have all of your support. And I've been working with Andy for some time, and Sarah, look forward to working with you more at Green Faith. I've just been accepted to your fellowship program, so yay, it's wonderful to have everybody together on one Zoom. Great. So do you want to turn to the slides in case that's helpful for people who like to have a visual? Oh, getting there. Okay, so my focus this evening is on better banking for people and the planet. Next slide.
I know, I saw.
Great. And just a little bit about my organization, Green America. We're a nonprofit membership organization based in Washington, D.C. We're what we call a green economy organization. So it's all about looking at how our economic roles, all the different economic roles that we play, can be a source, a motivation, a tool to create a socially just and environmentally sustainable society. So whether we're consumers, whether we're investors, whether we're business leaders, all of us have a role in the decisions that we make every day about how we deploy the dollar or how we withhold consumption. All of these decisions play a major role in the type of economy and society that we have. Next slide. And there are a lot of different ways that we can use our economic power, as I just mentioned, whether we limit consumption and shift the purchasing that we do need to do to those items that are in those businesses that focus on sustainable products and services, right? We can make sure that we're patronizing green businesses where the business model is infused with commitments to worker rights and environmental sustainability, and they're mindful of their impacts on communities. We can look, and this will be my focus tonight, but the bank that we use, what is the role of banks in outcomes for people and the planet? Related to banks is also the credit card. With every swipe, you could be contributing to community development and positive outcomes. Andy, of course, will be talking about socially responsible investing, voting proxy ballots, shareholder action, a very important tool to push our economy in the direction that's needed. If you're a Green America member, and you can sign up at greenamerica.org, we'll also send you a lot of information about our corporate campaigns. And it's about how we can use our voice as consumers to push big business for change where it's needed most. And we've seen a lot of progress in this front. For example, we've been pushing the telecommunication firms to use clean energy. They use a tremendous amount of energy drawing down in all of those data centers. There's more and more of a shift to renewables, which is crucial. We've been pushing companies in the food front to get rid of GMOs and to support regenerative and organic agriculture. And certainly, like with the chocolate companies, pushing for more attention to issues of child labor and deforestation that are prevalent in the cocoa industry. Next slide, please. So I just wanted to underscore, a lot of times I might throw out the word green, and I want to make sure that green is always understood to be sort of the marriage between social justice and environmental sustainability all the time. We're not looking at trade-offs like, oh, this will be good for the environment, but it will cost us all of these jobs, or this will promote jobs, but it'll destroy our environmental heritage. No, we're looking for holistic solutions that always work for both people and the planet. Thanks. Next slide. Great. So my focus today, and again, materials and the PowerPoint can be made available afterwards because I know the pace is going to be a little bit fast here. But my focus this evening is specifically on community development banking. This is a type of banking that fits into a larger frame known as community development investing. Okay, it's one of the main pillars of socially responsible investing, which you're probably familiar with: screening your portfolio, shareholder power. Another key facet of socially responsible investing is indeed community investing. Oops, did we lose our screen share there? Oh.
We did. I apologize.
That's okay.
Let's find
So,
you again.
while you're calling it up, I'll just continue. So there are a variety of different tools or vehicles or institutions that make community investing possible. And the ones I'm mostly going to focus on this evening are the community development banks and credit unions. But there are also vehicles known as community development loan funds. And there is community development venture capital. Perfect. Whoops. Next slide. There you go. Perfect. So community development investing in banking has really been exploding. It's fantastic. We've seen a 44% increase in the last couple of years. There are $266 billion in the community investing sector. And this is crucial support that I'll talk about in a little bit for job creation and basically anti-poverty measures to create more access to capital where it's needed most. Next slide, please. So why would you want to consider a bank or credit union with a community development focus? So we've more and more are attuned, well, certainly everyone here on this Zoom, to the increasing escalation of the climate emergency. And as Rabbi Fred was describing, the greatest impacts will be felt most heavily and first in the global South and by communities of color. And so when we think about banking, it's important to also look at the long-term history that they've had of racist practices, policies, and predatory lending. So before I start talking about the climate piece, I just wanted to underscore that there are many reasons to switch out of a conventional megabank. They've had intentional practices that enrich the banks at the expense of people of color, senior citizens, and women. Those are the groups that have been most targeted for wealth to be stripped from those constituencies in order to enrich the banks. Big banks are guilty of this, and then you're probably also familiar with like payday lenders, but whether it's a payday lender or a bank, both are extremely problematic. And the issues include exorbitant interest, lending when it's clear that repayment will be impossible, thereby getting people into a debt trap that they can never get out of. There are balloon payments and other strategies with insufficient disclosure of what's being signed. Oh, sign here, sign here, sign here. This is just a formality. People don't understand what they are signing away. And this is worse again for people of color. Even when they qualify for better terms, they're often shunted into a worse loan despite having a positive credit history. So there are many reasons why the big banks are problematic and why looking at a community bank or a community development bank is a better option. Next slide, please. There we go. So again, this has been in the headlines for some time. I'm sure everyone has heard about the fake customer accounts that Wells Fargo staff generated under severe pressure to maximize profits for the bank. There are unfair fees, lack of transparency, and so forth. That's been endemic across all of the conventional megabanks. Next slide. And then as we heard at the very get-go, from the Rainforest Action Network report on the role of banks, basically in bankrolling the climate crisis for their own short-term profit. Since the Paris Agreement, big bank financing of the fossil fuel sector has only been going up. And I know everyone on this Zoom finds this absolutely unconscionable, which it is. Banks globally have financed the fossil fuel sector with almost $2 trillion, increasing financing annually, which obviously is diametrically opposed to what the direction, right? The direction that we need to be sending financing right now towards renewable energy, energy efficiency, exploration of new battery technologies, et cetera, and not driving those assets into the fossil fuel industry that is destroying the planet and putting humanity on the brink. So we know that we need to keep global warming temperatures well below 2 degrees Celsius increase. And yet the behavior of the banks is in the opposite direction. This financing and underwriting is continuing, not just for existing fossil fuel projects, But the expansion of fossil fuels right now, expanding into new areas where fossil fuel infrastructure doesn't even exist. It's growing right now. So fossil fuel financing from the big banks is making possible more tar sands, oil pipelines, and other infrastructure, drilling for Arctic oil and gas, deep water exploration for oil and gas. This bucket is often known as extreme energy is the term. Escalation of fracking, the construction of new terminals for liquefied natural gas to keep that pushing out, and as well as coal. Coal is not dead everywhere yet, right? As was pointed out, the top 4 worst banks in the world for financing fossil fuels are JP Morgan Chase by a long shot, Wells Fargo, Citigroup, and Bank of America. There have been some recent pronouncements by the big banks about the need and the recognition to address the climate crisis. And these pronouncements are very welcome. We hope that there will be action behind them. I mean, oftentimes we see from major corporations that there are important statements that are made, and we welcome those statements, and we need to see the action behind them in order to bring those statements to life. So JP Morgan Chase recently came out with a very important proclamation, but it failed to address the issue of fossil fuel expansion. So even where we see that they're going to redirect some financing and they're going to work with other banks collaboratively, we still haven't seen the pullback on expanding the fossil fuel sector at this time that is so desperately needed. Next slide. Great. So that was a recap that was eloquently discussed at the introduction. Go right ahead on to the next one. Great. So now for the good news. You can indeed bank and invest for a greener world, one that serves the true interests of people in the planet. There are banks, there are credit unions, there are loan funds that have a very different business ethos. So they look at various communities, different constituencies that may be in need of support. They may be economically marginalized. One of my colleagues at Self-Help Credit Union taught me to refer to this as they're economically marginalized and they are underestimated, which I thought was a really crucial point, that there are smart entrepreneurs in every community and we fail to recognize them. So there are financial institutions that look at different constituencies and they look at the role that those constituencies can play in the economic uplift of an entire community. And they don't look at those constituencies as a source of profit to enrich a bank. So in other words, if there's a mispayment, that's not good news because we slap on a fee. If there's a mispayment, that means we need to talk with that borrower to find out what's going on, because that borrower is providing a service, is creating jobs. We need to figure out what type of technical assistance or additional support does that borrower need to succeed. Community development banks and credit unions are all about ensuring the long-term success of their clients, not viewing their customer base as a source of profit making. Next slide. So there are lots of positive impacts from community investing in banking. I know on PowerPoints, we're all accustomed to like these little clip art pictures of things. I just want you to know that these are all real people. So Leanne Nunley is the woman in the blue shirt on the left. Leanne lives in Virginia. She's a single mom and she became a homeowner for the first time after her husband faced incarceration. She shared her story. And she worked with a community investing institution in order to figure out how she can educate herself and develop the savings to become a first-time homeowner in order to create the type of stability that her family needs to succeed. This guy on the right holding up something, it looks a little bit like a ball, but his name is Jason Tonko. And Jason worked with a green bank to get access to capital for Tonko street lighting. And he's holding up a light. It's a little bit hard to see, but that light is created in a new way for energy efficient retrofits for street lighting. So these are the types of customers and clients that a community development bank or credit union is most interested in supporting. Next slide. Great. So where do you find these? You can go to greenamerica.org/getabetterbank. I'll have my email at the end, and you can also follow up with me. I'm often asked, Fran, to just cut to the chase, tell me where to bank. And it really isn't that simple because people have different personal banking needs. There are different levels of facility with comfort, with online banking. So it's something that you need to think about and do a little research on, but the payback is invaluable. So on our website, at Green America's website, we have a banking map. And these are the types of institutions that we're featuring. So one type is the federally certified community development bank or credit union. People are often surprised to learn that there is a federal certification for financial institutions that work productively, that work constructively with low-income communities. So they're not viewing them like a payday lender to figure out how to strip wealth from those communities with exorbitant fees and high interest. They're looking at their customer base as they're all part of community development. And there's a process through the federal government, the CDFI fund, that oversees this, and it's a wonderful program. So all of the banks and credit unions that get certified by the federal government, we include in our database. We also certify banks and credit unions with our own Green America criteria through our certification program. And we include those. We also include banks that are part of something called the Global Alliance for Banking on Values. So yes, there is an international body of banks who are striving to be mission driven and to address the needs of people in the planet. There's also a similar one for credit unions. It's called Inclusive. That's not a typo. That is how they spell it. It used to be known as the National Federation of Community Development Credit Unions. And it's all about the credit unions working hand in hand with their customers, with their communities, to give a leg up economically where it's needed most. And the last group of financial institutions that we include are called MDIs, Minority Depository Institutions. Now, I want to point out that minority depository institutions are not signing on to a particular set of values, but we all know that ownership matters. And if you're interested in that ownership piece and want a financial institution that is owned by people of color, then you may be interested in a minority depository institution. This ownership is, it's who owns the institution, or it's who controls the board, and what is the customer base that is served by this particular institution. So you might want to look at those. The MDI definition comes from the federal government also, and we've aggregated all of these into a single database. So next slide, please. Great. Here are just a few options that you might want to consider. You're probably familiar with some of them. Amalgamated Bank has its roots in the labor movement. Anyone can bank with them. Native American Bank, as the name implies, rooted in the Native American tradition, and anyone can bank with them. Aspiration Bank is an online-only bank. Stays out of the fossil fuel sector. They promote that heavily. Self-help credit union that I mentioned earlier. Credit unions often have a field of membership or some type of restriction on who can have deposits with them. But Self-Help Credit Union has a creative workaround. You can pay $5 to become a member, and they take that $5 and put it into your account. So, it's all to the good. Carver Federal Savings Bank, African American owned bank. They're active in New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, Virginia, DC. I'm afraid not in Maryland just yet. But if you're, their reach is expanding. Might want to look at those depending on where you're located. And also the Clean Energy Credit Union, dedicated to promoting renewable energy and energy efficiency. If you are a member of Green America, or you live with someone who is a member of Green America, or you're a family member, you fit into the field of membership of the Clean Energy Credit Union, and you are eligible to bank with them. So these are just a few for consideration, and there are many more. Next slide. Great. And I'm mindful of my time here. I can send links to all of this, but we want to make sure that when you're switching banks that you have a positive experience. So just to underscore, once you've found a better bank, make sure that you keep your better bank and your new bank, 2 banks, open simultaneously until all of your auto deposits and auto withdrawals, make sure all that is squared away. Then you're going to shut down your conventional mega bank, right? And you're going to be sure to tell them why. It's not just that you moved away. You're going to delineate for them what the problems are with conventional mega banks. And we have a sample letter to make it easy for you. Next slide.
You should join us for the next. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, great. I know many of you are familiar with the credit unions that Green America has promoted. There's one in our name as well that does provide us with a revenue stream, but there are others as well. Go ahead, next slide. And here are just a couple of links. You can find out more about us at greenamerica.org. If you're a green business leader, please see us at greenbusinessnetwork.org. And you can find other financial services, banks, financial planners at greenpages.org. I wanted to close out with just a 1-minute video featuring Beneficial State Bank. They're a member of Green America's Green Business Network. They are also a federally certified community development financial institution. And I wanted to share this because sometimes it's just helpful to see the faces who are really impacted by community development banking. And these are the people who the bank really cares about. So if we could see the video, you'll see the difference that a payroll protection program loan during this time of COVID-19 meant for this program on the West Coast. Thanks so much.
We were about to move into our busiest period of the year. Our schools shut down and everybody was asked to shelter in place. All our programs help youth not only gain science knowledge, but also build self-sufficiency and resilience skills. About 70% of our families are families of color and are living in low-income circumstances. When everything turned around and we were no longer able to provide programming, we had to lay off all but one of our education team. This Paycheck Protection Program, it allowed us to bring back those employees. Without a bank that was so invested in our organization and our community, I couldn't have done it. We decided to provide weekly grocery bags. By the middle of this month, we'll be serving 100 families. I can breathe just a little easier and focus on the work right in front of us. Green Plate Special came to Beneficial State Bank, and we've never looked back.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Fran. A lot to think about and a lot to do. So we'll turn to our next speaker. Our next speaker is Andy Behar. Andy is the CEO of As You Sow. As you will see, his organization can provide you with several web-based tools to help guide ethical investing. He is on the board of the U.S. Forum for Sustainable and Responsible Investing and advisory boards of Real Impact Tracker and One Earth Institute. Andy will discuss how to align your investments with your values and how to become an active investor. Andy?
Great. Thank you so much. And thank you, Fran. We've been working closely with Green America for many, many years. And actually also Green Faith. We've worked with Reverend Fletcher Harper back in, I guess we started back in 2011 during the Divest Fossil Fuel movement. And these are our just incredible allies. And it's really a community that's working together on climate. So I'm going to share a screen, and I know we're tight on time, so I'm going to try to do it in 10 minutes. But so here we go. So let me share this. Let me start. So I'm going to talk about shareholder power for positive change in the world. And my takeaway message just up front is that shareholders are the beneficial owners of every one of these corporations we're discussing here, that we own the companies, and that most people abdicate their power. And when you stop abdicating your power and you know how to use it, you can be you can make incredible change in the world. So I'm going to give you a little background on As You Sow. I'm going to talk about being an empowered shareholder, talk about stakeholder capitalism, and about knowing what you own.
Excuse me, please. No, I'm going up there.
I'm sorry? Okay. So I show you a picture of my dog, Oscar, because to get you to understand, I know he's got a great hairdo, right? To understand what we're talking about here is if Oscar dug underneath my fence and went to the neighbor's yard and knocked over his garbage cans, and my neighbor came and said, "Hey, what's going on with this?" I would say, "Oh my gosh, I'm sorry." And I go clean it up and I fix the fence because I feel responsibility for Oscar. Now, if I own a company, if I own some shares in a company and it dumps into a river and it pollutes the water in the local municipal water supply and people get sick, and somebody says, "Do you feel responsible?" Most people would say, "Nah, that's management. Go talk to the board." But in fact, if you own even one share of a company, you're not only responsible for that company, but you actually have a moral obligation to help that company to become better. And that's what As You Sow does. We've been around since 1992, so almost 30 years. And our theory of change is that environmental health and human rights can be improved by shifting corporate policies. Of the 100 largest economic institutions in the world, according to the World Bank, 69 are corporations. So Walmart sits right between Canada and Spain at number 10. These are incredibly powerful institutions. And when you make a change in their policy, it ripples through their supply chain and affects thousands of people and hundreds of other companies. These are some of the companies we work with. Our name is biblical, As You Sow. So as corporations sow good environmental, social, and governance policies, they're going to reap benefits. They're going to have increased share value. They're going to have extended employee retention. They're going to improve their brand reputation, and they're going to reduce their risk. So when we show up and talk to a company, we're saying we, the shareholders, we, the owners, have identified risk and we have a solution. So many of them see us as really their best friends. We're like consultants who come in to help them out. Shareholders have legal standing. If you own a share of a company, you have legal standing to ask about things that are material. Material means it's information that you would need to make a buy or sell decision. And that idea of materiality is very, very critical. It gives us the legal standing that we need to be able to ask companies a lot of questions. So what we do is we go and we talk to companies. And last year, and I'll show you in a minute, we had 131 engagements. So on different issues around climate change, around ocean plastics, around slavery and supply chain. And an example would be, we also do a lot of research. We do a lot of original research to separate the leaders from the laggards. So Monster Beverage scored a 0 on a report card called Know the Chain because they had slavery in their supply chain. So we sent them a letter, we phoned them up. I had a conversation with their lead attorney and I said, "You scored a 0. Coca-Cola scored 72. What's going on here?" And he said, "Slavery, we don't really care about that. It's just not a big issue for us." Like literally, he said that to me. I said, "Well, that's not good enough." And so that dialogue did not go well. And so we escalated that by filing a shareholder resolution. It's a 500-word document that is filed with the SEC and with the corporate secretary exactly 6 months before the annual meeting. It is a challenge that they must put it on their proxy. unless they fight you at the SEC, but I'll get to that later. So we had that conversation. We escalated to a shareholder resolution. We ended up going to a vote. I went to the annual meeting, I met their board, and we got a 20% vote. These votes are non-binding. So just remember that, because we've had some of our biggest victories at 6% votes, and we had some big losses at 90% votes. The company doesn't have to do it, but it becomes very, very public. So Monster, within 10 months after the annual meeting, they completely rebuilt their entire supply chain, how they have, basically all of their contracting, and we've now checked in with them every single year. We set milestones for them. So in the end of 2020, they hit their 2021 milestones. So we developed a relationship with the company. Inside outside means that when we're inside the boardroom at Starbucks, and Lonely Whale and Greenpeace are out on the street with pictures of sea turtles with green straws stuck down their throats, we're able to say, look what we have done through our decision making to our brand. Like, we're destroying our brand. It's going to cost tens of millions of dollars to do PR marketing around this. Or we can change our policy. We can stop using these green straws. We can stop dumping plastic in the ocean. The board then says, okay, that's a better business model. We're actually going to save money. We're going to improve our brand. Leaders, laggards, I'll be showing you in a moment. We do a lot of research. In fact, just last Wednesday, we released a scorecard on the S&P 250 companies, the biggest companies of the S&P 500. So the S&P 250 on diversity, equity, inclusion, and racial justice. We scored every company, and we now know who are leaders, who are scoring 0, who's scoring 70. And we can then use competitive pressure to drive that. And watchdogs, once we start talking to the company, we never go away. We actually won the #1 watchdog this year award from Ethos. So we just dog these companies like crazy. So this is in 2020, as I said, we had 131 engagements. So a lot of different companies. 76 of them we successfully negotiated. So basically 36 times the company said, interesting idea, let's go do something. Let's go do it. And so we didn't have to file a resolution. We filed 76 resolutions, and 40 of those we negotiated a settlement. 22 went to a vote. We had 4 majority votes with a 30% average support. $793 billion worth of assets were voted on As You Sow shares, As You Sow's resolutions. Now, we don't own any shares of anything. So every single one of these engagements, there was an underlying shareholder who authorized us to represent them at the company. They authorized us to file on their behalf. So we have a whole network, about 75 financial advisors and all their clients. We put together an engagement list every year, and they match us up with, actually, Abby Rome is on this call. She's on our board. And we met Abby because when we were working on antibiotics in factory farming, and we needed shares. And so we got the shares. We ended up actually getting, initially we talked to Tyson, Purdue, and Sanderson Farms. We wanted them to stop using antibiotics because of superbugs. They said, take a hike. So we hiked over to their customers, McDonald's, the KFC, and Wendy's, and Burger King. They weren't really interested either. So we took yet another hike and met with a bunch of parents who said, I'm not letting my kids eat McNuggets because these superbugs. We took that information back to McDonald's, said, look, you're going to be losing market share. It's a McNugget crisis. They signed the No Antibiotics Pledge, which then we used to get Wendy's to do it, and KFC. We took that upstream. Then we got all the big chicken producers because their customers were saying, we want chickens raised without antibiotics. So we use market pressure. So 49 climate change resolutions, 18 ocean plastic, etc. Gender diversity, forced labor, antibiotics, pesticide. So we have quite a portfolio of different things. So climate change, we work with the biggest banks. I'm actually going to switch. I'm going to stop sharing here, and I'm going to start sharing a different way, which is through a browser. So you're on the As You Sow website right now. And the reason is I'm going to show you, this is our resolution tracker. So what you're looking at here, these are the resolutions that, no, wait, maybe it's this here. There we go. I'm going to sort it by initiative, just so you kind of get a sense. So This year we filed with Costco, Walmart, Wendy's on antibiotics and factory farm. We're moving into beef and pork. CEO pay, we write a report every year on egregious CEO pay and wage justice. Climate change, you're going to see a lot. So, Fran just talked about this. So we were the folks filing the resolution at Bank of America, at Barclays, also with the big oil, Chevron, BP. These are utilities, Dominion and Duke, ExxonMobil, of course. But you'll see all the other banks. You'll see JP Morgan, you'll see Morgan Stanley. We started working with the banks back at the Dakota Access Pipeline when we realized these companies are making loans to these pipeline companies. And then they're saying, we have nothing to do with it. We don't know. We gave them money. Yeah, they built a pipeline. It doesn't work that way. We said, no, your name is associated with this pipeline that's destroying indigenous land, that's polluting this water, etc. We've now made the case that they need to actually need to disclose the greenhouse gas emissions related to their loans. We also got them to agree to not fund drilling in the Arctic Wildlife Refuge. So we're negotiating with the banks, and we work closely, of course, that report that you saw. Our name's not on it because the banks perceive us as the moderate, more people who are actually having conversations with them. But we work closely with all of those groups. So consumer packaging, I mentioned, so all ocean plastics. An example, Yum. So we got Yum Brands to stop using styrofoam at 6,700 stores globally. Between Yum, McDonald's, and Dunkin' means 3 billion styrofoam cups will not be produced this year. And again, we got shares, somebody, I don't know their name, owned Yum Brands, and they authorized us to file on their behalf. Any one of you could become part of that if you would like to. Diversity, gender equality, I think we'll stick on climate for the moment. So the other thing that we do is that we also look at mutual funds. And so right here on our, I have to show off here, #1 watchdog, we're very proud. On our website, you see this invest your values. So we were working on the divest fossil fuel movement, and we realized we had like 70,000 people signing a pledge to divest, but nobody knew what they owned. So we had to build this tool, which, for instance, you could go in and you could type in Vanguard, and up come all the Vanguard stocks, and you could pick one. And we get into real detail, like what's inside of it. A mutual fund is a basket of stocks. It might be 50 stocks. It might be 3,000 stocks if it's the Russell 3000. So we look at the biggest oil and gas holders by reserve. These are called the Carbon Underground 200. We look at coal companies. We also look at fossil-fired utilities. And you're going to see there's a lot of mutual funds that are called fossil-free that actually own a ton of fossil-fired utilities. Their name does not necessarily relate to what they actually do. So now you start to know what's inside. Now we also look at this through the lens of deforestation. So in this case, same basket of stocks, but now we're looking at which companies are in the business of palm oil, paper pulp, rubber, timber, cattle, and soy. So burning down the Indonesian and the Amazon rainforest. Who are the banks and lenders who are funding all of this? And surprise, surprise, JP Morgan, Bank of America, Citigroup, Morgan Stanley. You'll see it over and over. And then major consumer brands. So if you are investing in a potato chip company that uses palm oil, it's going to show up here. In this case, they get an F. You can also aggregate this up by different fund families. So in this case, Dimensional, I can tell you Dimensional does not care about the rainforest. It's pretty clear just from their largest funds. We update this thing once a month. And we also get into social issues. So if you want to know if you've got the prison industrial complex in your portfolio, in your 401k, and your 403b, we will be able to pick it out. So we're analyzing this, and we're looking to see if you own CoreCivic, the world's largest prison company, or if you own Geo Group. So we're looking at this through a lot of different lenses. We're also seeing border security. If you want to look at weapons, assault weapons, cluster munitions, I know I don't have time here. One last thing I'm going to show you is gender equality. So we analyze gender equality on 19 key performance indicators. So things like living wage, gender pay gap, parental leave. We're looking at women, sexual harassment policies. We're looking at women across the workforce. And another thing about this tool is if you go under search funds, you can sort them by financial performance. So I'm just going to pick 3-year financial performance. You can then go and say, okay, only show me diversified and only show me ones that get a fossil fuel grade of A and a deforestation grade of at least B and a gender grade of at least A. I'm just making this up. And you can look across all the different issues. You can also pick a bunch of different funds and you can sit them next to each other and you can actually do an analysis. Which one is getting grades in what? What are their, who's outperforming the other? Looking at 10-year returns, 5, 3-year returns. And just, again, the thing to be careful about, I know I'm going really fast, but all this stuff is free. It's on our website. It's completely available for the public, is just be careful. Like, for instance, when you look at this is a fossil-free fund, okay? That's got Carbon Underground 200, that's got coal, and that has fossil-fired, has 27 fossil fuel companies in a fossil-free fund. And this is allowable by the SEC. We tried to sue them and we were rejected. So just realize that names in prospectuses don't always mean anything. So that's why we built this site, because we wanted to enable people to have some truth so they actually know what they own, so that you can decide how to align your values with your investing. I'm going to stop now because I know we're really running late.
Andy, thank you so much for that presentation. I don't know when you get time to sleep, but I hope it is once in a while. Let us turn to our last speaker, Sarah Shore, who is organizing director of Green Faith. Green Faith helps support grassroots faith divestment efforts to move money away from fossil fuels and deforestation. She will discuss the progress being made by Jewish and other faith communities to divest from fossil fuels, and has suggestions for organizing friends, family, and faith institutions to fight climate change. Sarah?
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much, Ken. And thank you so much for having me at Dot Shalom. I've been a huge fan of the writing and speaking that Rabbi Fred Daub has done throughout the last several years, and I'm really honored to be on this panel with Fran and Andy. So thank you for having me. So as Ken said, I'm the organizing director with Green Faith. Before that, I was the anti-fossil fuel campaign director for 350.org and have been organizing around climate justice and mostly stopping fossil fuel projects like Keystone XL and the Dakota Access Pipeline in the US for the last decade or so. And I'll also just say that much of my commitment to justice and activism is very much rooted in my identity as a Jew. And I'm just really happy to be with you all talking about that today. So I'm gonna cover, and if we could put the slides up, that would be great. Thank you. Next slide. So I'm going to cover what is divestment and why do it, and what's the progress being made in specifically in religious communities right now, and how can we continue that progress. Next slide. So what is divestment? So we know that fossil fuel companies are some of the wealthiest and most powerful corporations on the planet, and that their core business model threatens humans and the planet. So for decades, they've corrupted our governments, they've contributed hugely to climate change and environmental degradation, and they've also committed human rights abuses across the world. So divestment is a way to take back the power the fossil fuel industry has over society. And divestment sort of takes the fossil fuel industry to task for its culpability in the climate crisis. And by shifting public support away from the fossil fuel industry, we can actually break the hold that they have on both our governments and our economy, and make way for a just transition to renewable energy and more sustainable ways of life. So divestment is literally the act of taking our money away from investments in the fossil fuel industry. When we talk about fossil fuel divestment, that's what fossil fuel divestment is. And this could be personal funds, it could be retirement funds or big endowments. And in some cases, fossil fuel divestment, as spoken to before from both Andy and Fran, divestment can also speak to divesting personal funds from banks who invest in fossil fuel projects. And divestment is also about taking our money away in a public way so that the social license of the fossil fuel industry is weakened, not doing it privately, but actually doing it out in the open. Next slide. So why divest? It's the moral thing to do and it's the financially responsible thing to do. So knowing what we know about the fossil fuel industry, we can say for certain that fossil fuel companies and burning fossil fuels are quite literally harming and killing millions of people across the globe. They're causing more intense climate-fueled weather disasters like storms and droughts and fires. Here in California, we've seen massive fires this year. I don't think I said that, but I'm calling you from Oakland, California. The fossil fuel industry is also just causing, major regions of the world to have to experience climate impacts like food insecurity because of massive flooding or drought, causing people to have to leave their homes, which are no longer livable because of climate change. So, and on top of all of the fossil fuel industry causing climate change, they're also committing human rights abuses against those who challenge them in many parts of the world. So we've seen this in places like Brazil and Ecuador and Nigeria, many other countries, even here in the US. So what these companies are doing is not just scientifically incompatible with a livable planet, it's also morally corrupt. And to paraphrase the climate activist Bill McKibben, if it's immoral for the fossil fuel industry to pollute the planet, it is immoral for any of us to profit from it. So I think all of our faith traditions and definitely Judaism teach us that if we can prevent bad things from happening, we should. We can't stand by. And Rabbi Fred already spoke to this at the beginning of the call, so I'm not going to speak to all of the Jewish reasons why we should do this work, but there are many. And for me, I'll say that the concept of tikkun olam and repairing the world is, for me, what guides a lot of my work towards climate justice and sort of is core to my identity of being Jewish. So if we are to live our lives morally, we cannot be complicit in allowing the fossil fuel industry to perpetuate its wrongdoing of people and planet. We must say and we must do something. And secondly, divestment is also not the smartest, divestment is the smart move financially. Many of the early adopters of fossil fuel divestment have actually had much better returns on their investments than folks invested in fossil fuels. And the fossil fuel industry is not a good investment right now. So it's rare that you can divest from an immoral cause and still make money. And in this case, it's actually the financially responsible thing to do. Fossil fuels, investing in fossil fuels seems to be a dying investment. So next slide. In our faith work, how do we decide whether to divest? So in religious and spiritual communities and at Green Faith, we look at 3 questions. Number 1, is the industry in question responsible for large-scale harm? 2, does this industry's practices go against the teachings of our religion? 3, is the industry in question willing to change? So number 1, is there large-scale harm involved with the industry? With the fossil fuel industry, the large-scale harm is undeniable. Fossil fuels are causing the planet to warm and leading to increased climate impacts across the globe. So yes, check, definitely yes. Number 2, does this industry go against the teachings of our religion? Again, I was going to point to some pieces, but I think Rabbi Fred already talked about these sort of the moral imperatives and Jewish teachings that show us how important it is to think about future generations and act morally with our money. So I'll leave it with what he said earlier. Supporting the destructive, harm-causing fossil fuel industry goes against many of the fundamental teachings of Judaism, and this is true for a lot of other religions as well. So is the industry in question willing to change? We don't think so. The fossil fuel industry can't rework its business model to be better. Its entire profits are based on extracting and burning fossil fuels. And, we've also seen this industry go at lengths to protect its reputation by denying that it is the cause of climate change, and actually spread a lot of misinformation about that. Just like the tobacco industry denied that cigarettes were harmful to health, the fossil fuel industry has done the same. So we know that we can't reform the fossil fuel industry, and we must actually stop it entirely. And we, some people might argue that it's better to work as a shareholder from within, like a fossil fuel company, to get it to change. We believe when the entire profits of a company rely on its destruction of the planet, it's not going to change its model. I think that's different with banks. Banks actually could decide to stop investing in fossil fuel projects. So the fossil fuel industry fails on all three of these questions. And so we conclude that divestment is a moral imperative, it's smart financially, and it's a fairly easy step that we can take as Jews and as moral people who believe in justice. We can help be one of the final nails in the coffin of the fossil fuel industry. So next slide. I'm going to talk a little bit about progress already on divestment in religious communities. So fossil fuel divestment has already proven to be a super effective strategy at undermining the reputation of the industry. So in 2016, Peabody Coal, which was the world's biggest coal company, filed for bankruptcy, and they listed the divestment movement as one of the reasons they were finding it hard to raise capital. Goldman Sachs also said that, quote, the divestment movement has been a key driver of the coal sector's 60% derating over the last 5 years. And now oil companies too have learned to be scared of the movement and are actively trying to discredit the divestment movement. So they too have called it, quote, a material threat to their business. So since the divestment movement began among mostly students at universities and around 2011, it's been a powerful force for change within the climate movement. And also from very early on, religious groups have been key leaders. So we've seen Protestant Christian groups like the Church of Sweden, the United Church of Christ in the US, the Episcopal Church in the US, the World Council of Churches, the Union Theological Seminary, and many others made divestment commitments that launched faith-based leadership within the movement. And even in denominations that haven't divested, the movement has been a really powerful tool for increasing awareness and strengthening the emphasis that denominations place on climate change, such as the Presbyterian Church has had a long campaign against for divestment, and also in the United Methodist Church. So Green Faith in 2013 played an important role in supporting and collaborating in many of these efforts, and also just articulating the case for divestment from a multi-faith perspective. So in 2013, we released a multi-faith divestment statement signed by Desmond Tutu, as well as hundreds of Christian, Muslim, Hindu, Buddhist, Jewish, and Unitarian leaders. And I'll share that with you. You can also find it on the Green Faith website. And then we also saw, after Pope Francis's Laudato Si encyclical, the Global Catholic Climate Movement organized a lot of Catholic groups to divest, and over 200 Catholic groups globally have made divestment commitments to date. There's also been a few notable Islamic divestment announcements, most significantly the Islamic Society of North America. And in addition, the Islamic Scholars Council of North America issued a fatwa an authoritative religious teaching that affirms divestment from a Muslim perspective. So given the complex geopolitics and cultural connections within the Muslim community globally and the Gulf states, this is a truly notable thing. And within the past few months, we've seen the American Jewish World Service join the Reform Rabbis Pension Board as one of the very few Jewish groups so far that have divested to date. We've seen that the movement within the Jewish community has been a little hamstrung by opposition to affirming the divestment framework because of the BDS movement. So that's been a challenge in the Jewish community. So we have more work to do in the Jewish community. We have more work to do to win victories in the Hindu and Buddhist communities, but this really truly is a multi-faith movement, and a lot of moral leadership has been shown on this issue. And I think it's also really important, it's so important for religious institutions to divest, because when religious institutions and organizations divest, they send a strong public moral message that really does decrease the power of the fossil fuel industry to do their business. So when religious institutions divest, they're making it harder for politicians to back these companies and do what they want politically. And while a single divestment announcement may not affect the company's financial bottom line, their moral stature is damaged, and they become a lot less powerful and less able to move government support for their destructive practices. So doing this work publicly is really important. I'll also just say that, next slide, please. I think, yes, okay. So there's also been a lot of progress on sustainable investment in religious communities. So religious groups have recognized the importance of investment into solutions, and I think with a particular focus on ensuring access to clean, affordable energy for the 800 million people around the world who currently lack access to electricity. So for the sake of human dignity and development, they must have access to energy, and for the sake of the climate, it has to be 100% renewable energy. So Green Faith has brought together religious groups alongside partners from the philanthropic foundation community and development organizations in a new campaign called Shine, which is designed to build pressure and move resources in the form of grants and investment into locally owned, mostly women-led, decentralized renewable energy projects. And we've also done research to identify over 100 of these emerging enterprises globally, and enterprises that actually meet the moral criteria we hold as spiritual and religious groups. So they're led and owned at the community level, often by women, and they're committed to employing local people to advance their livelihoods, and committed to the values of human rights and environmental protection. So this is the first time that we know of that this has been done. And this campaign has already raised over $100,000 for small grants to help these social entrepreneurs and their enterprises survive the COVID pandemic. And we're in the midst of preparing to launch an investment facility that will invest in these enterprises with a modest rate of return. So that will be upcoming. And we've found also through a survey of religious investors that more than 80% want to align their investments with their values, but almost all of those investors wanted a market rate return. So that's not good enough. We need to launch this new asset class and show the world that when we lead with values, the world can heal and grow more just and be more sustainable and prosperous for all of us. So next slide. I know I'm moving quickly because we're behind time. But lastly, I just want to talk about what are the steps to winning a divestment campaign. So I'm an organizer, and we know that winning on divestment is not always so easy. There's eight steps that we coach people on. The first one is like picking your target, picking your campaign. The key to picking a good target is just having picking someone who has the power to make the change you're asking for. They're the decision maker on how a fund is invested, for example. They should be relevant to your community and accountable to you in some way. And they should be accessible, someone that you can identify some avenues to influencing them. And in divestment campaigning, your target will probably be a local institution that you're connected to, maybe a university, a faith group, a local council, a foundation, or maybe something different. Number 2, you got to build your team. Often people think that it'll just take one person having one conversation with a decision maker, and it always takes more than that. So build a team that can take on different parts of the strategy, put heads together, share the work, and help educate the public about what you're doing as you're doing it. Number 3, planning your strategy. So strategy means knowing how to turn the resources you have, or the people, the tools, the skills, the time, into the power you need to achieve the change you want. So your strategy will be sort of a roadmap of how you're going to influence your decision maker. And engage your decision makers. So once you figured out your strategy, you got to engage your decision makers, have a conversation with them, and expect that we probably won't get what we want immediately, but we have to ask, and we have to ask repeatedly. Andy talked about how, you know, the first step is having a conversation with the company, and sometimes the strategy has to escalate. Same is true with divestment campaigns. And I'll just say here, to work effectively with decision makers, you don't have to be an expert on the issue. Some people think they have to learn everything about all the details of divestment before they can have a conversation with a decision maker. There are a lot of resources out there that you can turn decision makers to. But your role is actually to voice a public demand and build visible power so that your demand becomes a really easy choice for your decision maker to make. That's your job as a campaigner or an organizer. So then you have to increase the pressure and grow your support. Winning your campaign might not come easily, and at certain points you're going to need to escalate or put the heat on your decision makers. And it's also an opportunity to educate your community about what you're doing and why, and grow your team, give more people skills, and invite more people to be involved with climate activism. And keep persisting. You may not win quickly. Some of these divestment campaigns have been going on a long time, and even though they haven't won victories yet, they've moved a lot of people, they've educated a lot of people, and they've really turned the tides on what's sort of morally acceptable investments. So the last step is winning and celebrating and sharing your victory in order to inspire others to work on these fights as well. So don't forget to tell your story along the way. So that was a quick and dirty how to run a divestment campaign. We can also share lots of resources with you and stuff we've learned about doing these campaigns in faith communities specifically. And again, we work with a lot of other groups that do this work in an ongoing way with different kinds of institutions. So next slide, this is my last slide, I believe. Just we can all do this. This is something that we can all take part in. And we've now heard 3 amazing ways to do this work. So a few resources, and I'll put these in the chat when I'm done talking, is the Go Fossil Free website. Greenfaith.org also has a ton of resources on faith divestment. I will say we're in the middle of a website transition, so not all of them are up there yet, but you can always email me to get what you need. And I'll just say a couple of next steps. Green Faith just launched a global statement called Sacred People, Sacred Earth, and announced a global day of action on March 11th that will be calling for divestment as one of the many global demands. And so we invite you to sign that statement, take part in the day of action on March 11th, and we're expecting hundreds, if not thousands, of faith communities to be a part of that day of action. And we'll also be having a multi-faith divestment webinar in December. I'll also put a link to that in the chat and invite you to be a part of that if you're interested in faith divestment. So I will end there. Thank you so much.
Okay, Sarah, thank you very much for your contribution. I think we can go right to the question and answer period. A number have appeared in the chat. One for you, Sarah. Let's see, where is it? What faiths are represented by your organization? That was here.
A lot of faiths. We have Christians, Jews, Muslims, Hindus, Buddhists, all on staff. But we also have a lot of sort of top volunteers, fellows who represent a lot of different faith traditions and are doing all kinds of work in different faith communities. So
Okay,
yeah,
thank
a
you.
lot.
And a few questions arose for Andy. Let's see. The question is, what do people need to do to allow As You Sow to vote their shares? And I have an auxiliary question for me. Can a person do this with one share in a company?
Okay, so just to differentiate, there's voting your shares and there's filing resolutions. So if
Yes.
As You Sow has filed a resolution, let's just say on climate change with JP Morgan, we need someone who owns JP Morgan to authorize us to file on your behalf. If you want to do that, just be in contact with me. I'll put you in touch with a woman named Namita on my staff who will reach out and show you the list. And that's all. It's called our Activate program, where you're going to activate your shares. You have to have owned $2,000 worth of shares for at least a year. So
And
that's
universal for any corporation? $2,000
universal.
a year?
Now that may be changing in January of 2022. The SEC just raised the limits to try to block shareholders' power. And I'm not going to get into that whole thing, but it may be going up to $25,000 if you've owned them for 1 year, $15,000 for 2, and $2,000 for 3. Right now, $2,000 held for a year. We're filing literally in the next 6 weeks. We're probably filing 80 resolutions. So we're in the middle of proxy season right now. November, December is when all of 90% of them are filed. Now, voting your proxies, if you own shares in a company where we have filed a resolution or anyone else has, you can vote. You will vote even 1 share. You can vote all your shares. This year, for the first time, As You Sow will actually have a voting service where you could instruct your financial advisor that you would like to vote according to the As You Sow slate. We will be part of the company. There will be a way to vote, have As You Sow vote for you, like you would have ISS or Glass Lewis. Those are proxy voting services that probably most of your financial advisors or money managers, they use those services to vote. Most of the time, you are probably voting with management. You're probably voting against us. If you don't know, if you haven't given instructions to your financial advisor, you are probably voting against our resolutions. So that's problematic. Just an example, like ISS, even though they said vote for As You Sow's anti-slavery resolution at Monster, companies like BlackRock voted against it. So just realize that even, yes, I know it's people don't realize exactly how they're being voted, but you have total control over it. You have 100% control to inform your financial advisors how to vote. So to 2 things, again, filing and voting. We put out a report called Proxy Preview every March that lists not only all of our resolutions, but everybody's resolutions. So last year, 428 resolutions. They were all listed, each one. And there was the proponent described why it's important. And there was information and then a table listing every company that got a resolution. So there are about 350 companies that got resolutions.
Okay, thank you. And a question for Fran. Let's see, what about credit unions for federal employees that support home mortgages and car loans for employees? Are they less green?
So credit unions are often a great choice There are community development focused credit unions, which are the ones that I mainly spoke to tonight, where again, the mission of the institution is economic uplift. So other credit unions can be an excellent choice. So if you're in a credit union, you're so much you're way ahead. If you really want to have your accounts targeted toward working with low to moderate income communities on community development, then it would be a different type of credit union. But if you're with a credit union that's meeting your needs, maybe then you look at some other economic choices that you can make with other parts of your holdings, other parts of your economic life.
Uh-huh. Okay, thank you. Someone mentioned that I could point out that fossil fuel companies, and I would say there are very few, are now beginning to diversify into clean energy. And I think of many of the larger diversified funds. BlackRock has made statements, for example, that they are diversifying, but they'll just move small inches, I think, unless pressure is continually placed upon them. So these statements should be taken, I think, with a grain of salt.
Also, just note that
Yes.
that the Department of Labor just issued a new guideline that said that makes it much more difficult to put ESG funds into your 401k plan or your 403b plan, your retirement plan. That they've so they see the writing on the wall. One out of every $3 right now is being invested with environmental, social, and governance (ESG). And that's up from 10 years ago. Is one out of every $12. There was just a report that came out from US CIF, which I'm on the board of. One out of every $3 is now being invested. That's out in like the wild. Within a 401k plan where it's controlled by the company, it's zero. There's literally none. And we're now doing an analysis using our tools of, we're going to be putting out a report card for every company. An example, Amazon, they're great on climate, right? They got electric vehicles. They advertise about this. They've taken their data centers into all 100% renewables. It's incredible. Yet every Amazon employee is forced, and I know this for a fact, to own fossil-fired utilities, coal, and big oil. Every single one does. This is the problem. Nobody knows what they own. They're all, I mean, it's ignorantly complicit. And, Rabbi Fred, you can talk about this. If you're ignorantly complicit, are you actually, is that okay? I don't think it is. I think you need to learn so that you can actually become educated enough to use your power to make change. And this is the job. This is of Fran and Sarah, the work you do, educating people. This is where there is a regenerative economy based on justice and sustainability that is emerging at this very moment. The best companies, the leading companies, are making these hard choices. Kellogg just agreed from our resolution to stop using glyphosate, stop spraying their wheat and oats with Roundup right before they harvest it. General Mills has agreed to regenerative agriculture. Companies are doing this, but until shareholders put their money there and until customers put their loyalty and money there, then those companies will not be rewarded. And the ones who are still dedicated to destruction and extraction, we're seeing there's an inflection point today. It's happening right now. And it's about moving trillions of dollars, dollar by dollar, into this new regenerative economy. That's our future.
Yeah. Okay, I see we're nearing the end of our allotted time, and we could continue this for discussion for a long time. There are many more questions that we haven't gotten to. So I would like to thank everybody who has participated, all of our silent viewers and not so silent viewers. And we hope we can continue this at some point in the future. This has been extraordinarily valuable, and I think will lead to hopefully to many changes in people's portfolios.